I have spent 41 years inspecting things for a living. Bridges, overpasses, culverts, retaining walls along the Trans-Canada. If there was concrete holding something up in southern Ontario, there is a reasonable chance I put my hands on it at some point and told someone whether it was going to hold. I know exactly what a hairline fracture looks like before it becomes a catastrophic failure. I know the difference between a crack that can be patched and a crack that means you shut the whole structure down. I just did not expect to spend my retirement applying that knowledge to my own family. My name is Douglas. I am 74 years old. I live in a house in Guelph, Ontario, that I have owned since 1986, which means I have owned it longer than my 3 children have been alive, and considerably longer than I have trusted any of them with anything important. Welcome to Dad's Fierce Revenge. Pull up a chair. This one is going to take a while. Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Hit like, subscribe, and stay right here because you are going to want to hear all of it. The surgery was a triple bypass. I want to be precise about that because there is a significant difference between a procedure that is uncomfortable and a procedure that involves stopping your heart, opening your chest, and rerouting the blood supply to keep you alive. And I think that difference matters when we start talking about who showed up and who did not. My cardiologist, a methodical woman named Dr. Anand, who I have come to respect enormously, told me in January that we were looking at surgery before the end of March. She was not dramatized that the way my old supervisor used to tell me a bridge needed to be closed. Direct, factual, no room for negotiation. I appreciated that. I have always appreciated directness. It is a quality my children did not inherit. I told them in January the 9th, to be specific. I have the date written in my day planner in the same printing I have used since drafting school because I wanted to remember exactly when I gave them the information and exactly how much time they had to do something about it. My youngest child, my son, called me at 7 in the evening. I could hear the hockey game on in the background. He said, "Dad, that's serious." I agreed that it was. He said, "We'll figure something out." I said, "Okay." He asked if I had looked into whether my pension covered private recovery. Just out of curiosity, Dad, just thinking ahead. My older daughter, my middle child, sent me a text. Not a call. A text at 11:43 at night, which I read the following morning when I woke up, standing in the kitchen in my housecoat with my decaf and my blood pressure medication. The text said she was so sorry to hear that she was absolutely going to be there for me, that she would work it out with the school board because she had personal days left, that I should not worry. She ended it with 3 red hearts. She has sent me 3 red hearts at the end of messages for about 4 years now, and I have come to understand that in her particular vocabulary, 3 red hearts means, I have acknowledged this thing and now it is the thing's problem to sort itself out. And then there was my oldest, my daughter. She called 2 days after I told her, and I remember it was raining outside, a hard gray January rain coming off Lake Erie the way it does in Ontario, when winter cannot quite commit to being winter. She asked how I was feeling. I told her I was scared but ready. She said she was scared too, that she had been reading about bypass surgery online. And then she paused in that specific way. She has been pausing since she was about 22. The pause that means she is about to pivot. She said her husband's truck needed transmission work, and the estimate had come in higher than expected, and she was just wondering, if I could, she would pay me back by April. She is 46 years old. I transferred the money from my online banking while she was still talking. She said, "Thank you, Dad. I love you. Take care of yourself." She did not come to the surgery. She did not call the morning of the surgery. She did not, as far as I can determine, think about the surgery at all once the money had cleared. I want to stop here and tell you something about the morning of my operation, because it is important, and I have not said it out loud to anyone. I woke up at 5 o'clock in my house on Harding Crescent. The house was quiet in a way that a house is quiet when only one person has been living in it for 11 years. Since my wife Margaret passed. Not peaceful exactly. More like a held breath. I made tea I knew I could not drink. I sat in the armchair by the front window where I always sit in the morning, and I watched the streetlight on the wet pavement, and I thought, if something goes wrong today, the last conversation I had with my oldest child was her asking me for money for a transmission. I sat with that for a while. Then I called a cab. I cannot drive myself anywhere now, post-diagnosis, and I was not going to ask any of them. I checked in at the hospital with a canvas bag and the phone Margaret's sister had given me 2 Christmases ago, and a card in my wallet with my cardiologist's name on it. The intake nurse, a steady, no-nonsense man named Albert, who looked like he had seen every version of nervous that existed, got me settled and took my bag. They kept me for 9 days. Heart surgery recovery is not a small thing. Dr. Anand had been honest with me about that. The pain in the first several days is specific and deep, not the kind of pain that announces itself dramatically, but the kind that simply occupies you the way weather occupies a place, constant, unremarkable after a while, simply always there. There is the business of breathing exercises and compression socks and learning all over again that your body has limits that override your intentions. There is the indignity of needing help with things you have done alone since you were a small child in Sudbury, watching your father get ready for a morning shift at the smelter. There is also the loneliness. I want to talk about the loneliness because I think it needs to be named accurately. The loneliness of a hospital room is not the same thing as being alone. I have lived alone for 11 years, and I have made my peace with solitude. I have a routine, and a garden and neighbors I like, and a Thursday morning men's group at St. Andrews that has kept me saner than I probably deserve. The loneliness in that room was different. It was the loneliness of being surrounded by fluorescent light and the quiet beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of other people's visitors, and having no one in the chair. There was a chair, brown vinyl, pushed into the corner because no one had needed to move it. I looked at that chair every day. My son called on day 2. He asked how I was feeling. He mentioned, naturally, that property values in Guelph had continued to go up even with the interest rate situation, and that he had been reading some things about estate planning, and had I thought about whether the house was set up appropriately, just from a tax efficiency standpoint, just something to think about. Dad, no rush. I told him my affairs were in order. I have been inspecting structures for a living since 1983. I know how to maintain a thing so it does not fall down without warning. My middle daughter called every day from day 1 through day 5. I will give her that. Every single day, brief calls, 4 or 5 minutes each, full of reasons she was working on coming and updates on those reasons. A curriculum deadline at the school board. Her youngest had a chest cold that might be something, that turned out not to be something. Her husband's schedule. A provincial professional development day she had somehow not known about. Creative reasons. I have to admit she was inventive. On day 5, she said she was definitely coming on day 7. On day 7, she sent a text. Something unexpected, Dad. I am so sorry. We'll explain everything. Thinking of you at a minute, I read that text. I set the phone down on the hospital bedside table. I looked at the brown vinyl chair in the corner, and I felt something shift in me that I can only describe the way I would describe it in an inspection report. A structural change. Slow. Certain. Permanent. My oldest never called after the money had cleared. On day 6, the nurse I had seen most often on the floor, a woman in her early 60s named Claire, who had the calm efficiency of someone who had spent decades watching people be exactly who they were, came in to do my evening checks and found me reading a novel Margaret's sister had sent. She glanced at the brown chair. She looked at me with the particular look of someone who understands something that hasn't been said. She asked very gently if my family was coming. I said yes. I said it the way I have said things I was not certain of for most of my professional life, calmly and without elaborating. She nodded slowly. Before she left, she put her hand briefly on my arm. She said, "You ring the call button for anything." I have thought about that moment every single day since I left that hospital. On day 9, Dr. Anand signed my discharge papers and told me my recovery was progressing well. A volunteer wheeled me to the main exit in a chair as required by protocol. I ordered a cab from my phone while sitting at the curb under the hospital overhang in the gray March cold. The driver was a young man named Kevin who asked how I was doing. I told him I had just had heart surgery. He said, "Holy moly, and you're just going home now?" I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. He drove carefully. When we got to Harding Crescent, he helped me to my front door with my bag and said, "Take it easy, sir, for real." I thanked him. He got back in the cab and sat there for a moment before pulling away, and I understood he was making sure I got inside all right. I stood at my own front door for longer than I needed to. My chest was still tender. I had a medication bag and a discharge sheet and a set of breathing exercises printed on 2 pages by the cardiac care nurse. There was no reasonable explanation for standing on my own front step the way you stand, waiting to be let in somewhere you have lived for 38 years. But I stood there, Looking at the door I hung in 1987, the handle I replaced in 2019, the crack in the brick beside the frame that I have been meaning to have pointed for 2 seasons. I went inside. The house was exactly as I had left it 9 days earlier. I want you to understand what that means. When a 74-year-old man has open heart surgery and comes home 9 days later, and the house is exactly as he left it, it means that no one came. Not to water Margaret's African violet on the kitchen windowsill. Not to take in the mail that had accumulated in the box by the door. Not to check the thermostat, or clear the snow from the front walk that had been there since the storm on the 4th, or simply to be present in the space where I lived. No one came. I set my bag down. I moved through the kitchen slowly, the way your body insists on moving when it has been through something it is still negotiating. I put the kettle on. I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, the cedar hedges along the property line. The snow still on the garden beds where Margaret used to grow her vegetables. The old wooden bench I built from a kit with my son one long ago summer, back when he was 12, and thought everything his father did was worth learning. Everything exactly as I left it. I thought about the brown vinyl chair in the corner of my room. I thought about Claire's hand on my arm and the particular kindness of a professional who owes you nothing and gives you something anyway. I thought about my oldest daughter saying, "Thank you, Dad. Take care of yourself," and the specific silence that followed when she hung up. I thought about what it is to love people. I have loved my children the way I inspected structures, carefully, consistently, not because there was an audience, not because someone was grading me, but because a thing worth building is worth maintaining, and I have never known how to do anything halfway. Love is not a line item you fund when you feel like it. It is not a response proportional to what someone can give you back. I made my tea. I carried it to the armchair by the front window. I sat down. The afternoon light came low and gray through the window, the March light that never quite apologizes for itself. The street was quiet. A neighbor's cat sat on the fence across the road. I sat there for a long time. Then I called my lawyer. His name is Graham Ferris. He has handled my affairs for 22 years. He is a retired hockey referee on weekends, and the most methodical man I have ever met in a civilian context, which I mean as the highest compliment. When I called him from my armchair with my tea and my discharge papers and 9 days of clear information, he listened without interrupting for a long time. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Douglas, are you sure about this?" I told him I had been sure since day 6. He said he would get the documents ready. I thanked him, hung up, and finished my tea. Outside, the cat had moved on. The street was exactly the same as it had always been. If you have been listening for a while, do me a quick favor, subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, and it costs you nothing and it means everything. Hit the like button. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know where you are watching from. Here is something about structural engineers that I think people who are not structural engineers often miss. We do not guess, we do not assume. We assess load, we run calculations, we test to failure in controlled conditions before anything bears weight in the real world. The goal is never drama. Drama means something went wrong. The goal is a structure that holds for 50 years without anyone having to think about it. My children, if they had been paying attention to any of the 9 months they spent in various engineering classrooms at my insistence, would have understood that when you have solid evidence of a structural deficiency, you do not ignore it and hope it resolves. You document it accurately. You decide what the appropriate response is, and then you build accordingly. Graham had the papers drafted by the end of April. 6 weeks after I came home from the hospital, I called all 3 of my children and invited them to dinner. Sunday, first weekend of May. I want to be honest about what I was doing because I think honesty matters more than strategy at my age. I was not performing forgiveness. I was not laying a trap. I was simply providing conditions under which each of them could show me who they were, one more time, with full information, and then I was going to remember it. I made a pot roast, the kind with the root vegetables Margaret used to insist on, turnip and parsnip, the combination my son always complained about when he was a teenager and came around to appreciating somewhere in his 30s. I set the good table. I put some Tragically Hip on low on the stereo, the album we used to play on long drives when they were kids. I was by every visible measure a warm 74-year-old man who was simply glad to have his family over. My son arrived first. He always has. He came in with a bottle of Ontario Red from the Niagara region, a good one. the gesture of a man who wanted his entrance to communicate something. He hugged me. He held it a moment longer than his usual hugs. Then I watched his eyes move through the house, the way my eyes move through a structure I am assessing. The crown molding in the living room, the original hardwood floors, the condition of the windows, the fireplace insert I had put in 2011. The built-in shelves I installed myself the summer before Margaret got sick. Everything noted, catalogued, evaluated. He smiled and said the place was looking good. I said it had not changed since he was last here. He said, well, it really holds up. I said, yes, I suppose it does. My middle daughter arrived 20 minutes later with a store-bought butter tart tin and the specific apologetic energy of a woman who knows she owes something considerably larger than butter tarts, but is hoping the gesture might count for more than its face value. She hugged me for a long time. She was relieved to find me upright and functional. Then she sat down across the kitchen table from me and began to explain the hospital visits that had not happened. And I sat across from her, and I listened to every word with the patience I have been building my entire professional life, absorbing information without reacting, filing it accurately, forming my conclusions privately. She had felt terrible. She used that phrase 4 times. People who feel terrible about things, I have noticed, generally move every obstacle in their path to avoid doing those things. I said I understood completely. She exhaled. I passed the butter tarts. My oldest arrived 40 minutes after the stated time, which for her is practically punctual. She came in with the particular expression she has worn since her early 20s, a kind of weary amusement at the world, as if life is a lineup she is always hoping will move faster. She kissed me on the cheek. She sat down. She did not mention the hospital. She did not mention the money. She picked up her fork and asked if there was anything to drink and checked her phone twice before we had finished the first course. I watched all 3 of them, son keeping track of the property. My middle daughter laughing a little too readily at everything I said, performing warmth with genuine effort. My oldest eating with the particular ease of someone who has no idea that anything in the room is different from how it has always been. I set my fork down. I said I had been doing some thinking since the surgery, the way you do when you have had time to lie still and consider things. The table adjusted, subtle. Small shifts in posture, in attention. My son set down his fork. My middle daughter stopped mid-reach for the butter. I told them at my age it made sense to have your affairs in order, that I had been working with Graham on some updates to my documents, just making sure everything was properly situated for whenever the time came. Practical, I said. Just practical. My son said that was very sensible, Dad, very responsible. My middle daughter said, of course, that's so smart. My oldest looked up from her phone and said she thought that was a good idea. I picked up my fork and said, who wants more pot roast? What happened over the following 3 months had the slow, reliable quality of something you have engineered correctly. My son began calling every Sunday, promptly. He would ask about my recovery, my medications, my sleep, the cardiac rehab program I was attending at the community center on Wednesdays. And then, naturally, with the inevitability of a calculated load finding the path of least resistance, the question would come. Had I had anyone in to look at the roof lately? Did I know what comparable properties on Harding Crescent were going for? Had I thought about whether it made more sense financially to stay in the house long-term or to look at downsizing? Just from a practical standpoint, just something to consider. No rush, Dad. Just thinking about what's best for you. My middle daughter started coming by on Saturdays with groceries. Real, thoughtful groceries, not gestures. The coffee I actually drink, the brand of rye bread I have had every morning for 15 years, the particular soup that Margaret used to make from scratch that my daughter now buys canned, because she knows I like it even in the canned version. She was warm and genuinely good company. Sitting with her in the kitchen on those Saturday mornings, I felt something I had not expected to feel, something that surprised me. Grief. Not for what was happening now, but for what could have been happening for years. For the version of her that could have come through that hospital room on any of the 9 days. Day 3, day 5, day 8, any day at all, just once, and sat down in that brown vinyl chair and been there. That daughter, the one who brought the good coffee and asked real questions about how I was actually feeling, she had been available all along. I drank my coffee and talked with her about her students and her garden, and I was, as always, warm. My oldest started texting. Short messages, imprecise punctuation, but messages. How are you feeling? Cold snap coming. Stay inside. She sent me a photograph once of a dog she had seen on her street with no explanation whatsoever, which I believe was her version of reaching out. I responded to everyone with full sentences and a period at the end because I am 74, and I was raised to finish what I start. They visited, they called, they brought things. They performed the care they should have offered freely, now offered because they had understood that something had changed in the house, in me, in the documents filed in Graham's office, and they were working with the information available to them. I accepted every visit. I cooked. I laughed. I asked about their children. I never, not once, mentioned the hospital. Not a single reference. Not a sideways comment. Not even the quality of silence that signals something unsaid. I gave them nothing to negotiate with and nothing to apologize to. The hospital had happened. I had processed it the way I have processed most things in my life, alone, accurately, and without drama. I did not need them to apologize. I needed them to understand. And understanding, in my experience, is not reliably achieved through conversation. It is achieved through consequence. The consequence was already written. Graham had the file. It is a Tuesday morning in late September now. I am sitting on the back porch of the house on Harding Crescent, with my coffee and the particular satisfaction of a man who has reviewed the load calculations and is confident in the structure. The yard is doing what Ontario yards do in September, the maples going orange at the top first, the garden beds winding down, the light arriving at that low late summer angle that makes everything look like it is being photographed from a long time ago. A chickadee lands on the fence post, stays for a moment, leaves. My hip is fine. My heart is something more than fine. Dr. Anand told me at my last appointment that my numbers were, in her word, excellent. I walk 45 minutes every morning along the river trail. I go to the men's group on Thursdays. Last month, I volunteered with a mentorship program at the Guelph engineering faculty, talking to third-year students about careers in structural inspection, and I spent 2 hours in a classroom answering questions from young people who were paying close attention. And I left feeling something I had not expected to feel, something like purpose. I made a donation to the hospital foundation last month, to the cardiac care floor specifically, the kind of fund that pays for small comforts in rooms where people wait alone. A better chair for the corner, warmer blankets. I made it in the name of Albert, the intake nurse, and Claire, who put her hand on my arm. I did not tell anyone. There are 3 charitable organizations in my will now, where 3 names used to be. The first is a veterans support organization out of Hamilton, men and women who held themselves together through things that would have broken most of us, with very little help from the people who were supposed to be there. The second is a bursary at the University of Guelph's engineering program, because I believe in building things that last, and a young person with the right education and no money to pay for it is exactly the kind of structural problem I know how to address. The third is a pediatric cardiac care fund at Sick Kids in Toronto, because children did not choose to be in hospital rooms, and someone ought to make those rooms a little less frightening. The house on Harding Crescent, the hardwood floors and the crown molding, and Margaret's African violet, and the bench my son and I built together one summer when he was 12 and had not yet learned to see everything as an asset, goes to the estate, to be liquidated in support of those same 3 organizations. Graham knows. Graham has known since April. Graham is methodical and precise, and he will manage everything exactly as I have specified. There is also a letter. 1 page, handwritten, drafted in the neat print I developed over 41 years of making sure field notes could be read under poor light in any weather. It is addressed to my 3 children, to be opened after. I will tell you what it says. It says this. By the time you read this, you will have questions, and I want to answer the one that matters most, because I was a structural engineer for 41 years and I believe in giving people accurate information. I was in hospital for 9 days following my bypass surgery. The surgery was March 22nd. I was discharged March 31st. I came home in a cab I ordered from my phone. I told you the date 8 weeks in advance. I want to be precise about that. 8 weeks. I am not writing this with anger. I genuinely am not. I am writing it because you deserve to know the exact load-bearing reason for every decision in this document. In structural work, we call it transparency. In a family, I imagine it goes by other names. The house was built well. Your mother and I maintained it carefully for 32 years together, and I maintained it alone for 11 years after that. I hope the organizations that receive it find it useful. I love you. That part never changed and it never will. Dad, My middle daughter comes on Saturdays. Last week she brought Montreal bagels because she had driven down to visit a friend and remembered that I like them, and she had kept them in a paper bag in her car for 4 hours to make sure they got here still fresh. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She told me her oldest is thinking about university, possibly science, possibly education. She is not sure yet. I told her Margaret had not known until her third year either, and turned out to be one of the best teachers I ever knew anyone to be. My daughter looked at me when I said that, a look I have not seen from her in a long time, something open in it. She said she did not know that about her mother. I said there was a lot about her mother she might not know. She said she would like to know. I said I had some time. The paperwork does not know about the bagels. Graham's file does not change because she remembered what I like. That is not cruelty. That is structure. A hairline fracture that has been ignored for too long does not close itself because someone starts paying attention. You assess it accurately, you document it, and you decide what the structure requires. I decided in March. I do not renegotiate load calculations after the pour has set. My son calls on Sundays. My oldest texted me last week a photograph of the first snow on the Niagara Escarpment with no context whatsoever. I texted back a single word, beautiful, because it was. I love my children. That is not the complicated part. You can love people completely and still let consequences be what they are. You can love people and still refuse to pretend that 9 days in a cardiac ward, 9 days of an empty chair in the corner of a room, was something other than exactly what it was. You can grieve the version of a relationship that could have existed, and still show up warm for the version that does. My middle daughter, on her way out last Saturday, stopped in the doorway and turned back. She looked at me for a moment. She said, "I really am sorry, Dad, about March. I've been trying to say that right for months." I looked at her standing in my doorway in her coat with the paper bag from the bagel place folded under her arm. I said, "I know. I did not say it was fine because it was not fine. I did not say it doesn't matter, because it matters. I said I know, and I meant it, and we left it there. That is where it lives now. Not resolved, not erased, not the subject of a conversation anyone needs to have. It lives exactly where it belongs. The maple in the backyard has gone fully orange this week. The chickadee comes back most mornings. I am going to rake the leaves this weekend if my chest cooperates, which Dr. Anand says it should. I will go to the men's group Thursday. I will talk to Graham next week about a small administrative update, nothing dramatic, a detail about the bursary naming. The will is written. The garden is winding down the way it always does. The house on Harding Crescent is standing exactly as it should. Everything is where I decided it should be.